Hello everyone and welcome to History Saver 1941. Today we are in Pensacola, Florida, checking out some of Pensacola's most historic locations in one of America's most historic cities. Alright, as you can see, we are at Old Christ Church here in downtown Pensacola, and it was erected in 1832. This is one of the oldest churches in the state of Florida, if not the oldest. And it is a beautiful church that we unfortunately cannot go into right now, but it is just absolutely amazing. And let's give you a little peek and show you what we can. Alright, so actually this church that you see right behind me was established in 1832 as an Episcopal church here in the Pensacola area. For a long time, this church was in service. There were services here in downtown Pensacola every week, and the Bishop of London licensed priests to minister here in Pensacola in the 1700s. And this is the church that was organized after the parish was organized in 1827. And this church was erected in 1832, making it one of the oldest churches here in Pensacola. And during the Civil War, the cool story that is associated with this church is during the Civil War, the federal troops that were here in the Pensacola area actually turned this church into a stable and boarding house for troops. So they completely took the inside of this church and just demolished it. And actually there was fire set inside of this church. There was all kinds of things that those federal troops did inside of this church that really you shouldn't do inside of a church, but they did anyway. Of course, it was wartime and things were a little bit different. But this church was and is one of these staples here in Pensacola as one of the oldest locations here. Now, there are bishops actually buried up underneath the church itself, and that was confirmed through a archaeological excavation that was performed not too long ago. It's been like 20 years ago, I think. But there are 3 bishops that I do not know the names of that were actually buried up under the floor of this church. So pretty cool story to go along with this place. And in 1936, this church was deeded to the city of Pensacola, and it was used as a public library until 1957. And then the Pensacola Historical Museum was established here in August of 1960. And then this property became a piece of the Pensacola Historic Museum. Okay, so we are leaving the site of Old Christ Church. We're going to get back on the road. We're going to show you guys a couple of more places. Unfortunately, a lot of these homes, due to COVID and the recent hurricanes, we can't go in. So things like the church and a couple of homes that we're going to see along the way have been shut down due to COVID, and unfortunately you can't see these places. But we're going to take you to as many locations here as possible today. We're going to show you around Pensacola, take you to some historic haunted locations that we will be investigating live later on the channel. So you will be able to see a lot of these places before we actually go there, which is pretty cool. So stay tuned and we'll see you in just a bit. All right, so we are still in Pensacola, Florida. We have come to another extremely historic location and probably one of the oldest cemeteries in the state of Florida itself. And this is behind me, the St. Michael's Cemetery. So let's go in and check out this place and give you a little bit of history on one of America's most historic cemeteries. So St. Michael's Cemetery was established around 1781 during Pensacola's second Spanish occupation here in the city. And this cemetery was in use mainly till around the 1821 period. Now, with that being said, people have been buried here after 1821 and even during the Civil War. This cemetery has been a burial ground for people that have died since the mid and late 18th century. There are thousands of unmarked burials in this cemetery, and there are markers, monuments, and tombs that survive here from the 1820s and onward. And buried here are people of all ages, gender, ethnicity, religion, occupation, national origin, and social economic positions. This cemetery contains a ton of people who have served in our military and a ton of people who died of the yellow fever epidemic. So this cemetery is probably one of the most historic places here. So let's dive into St. Michael Cemetery and give you a quick sneak peek around. Now, this is one of the cooler graves that I've come across. First graves I come across here was this one of Augustus S. Barrios, Florida. It was a private 815th Pioneer Infantry during World War I, and he died in 1958. So a very cool grave of a World War I veteran here, which is pretty cool. You don't see a whole lot of World War I veteran graves from what I have found around this area. And as you can see, this 8-acre space is burial to thousands and thousands of people. And with research that has been performed locally here over the last few years, actually, they have found that unmarked graves dot the landscape actually outside of the cemetery gates. So not only are there thousands of unmarked graves in the cemetery, there are thousands of unmarked graves outside of the cemetery. And speaking of historical figures, and as you can tell by the American flag that is floating right here, look who we just found the grave of. Stephen Russell Mallory. Wow. Now, Mallory was born on the island of Trinidad in 1812. And Stephen Mallory's family eventually made it to Key West, where they made their home. And Mallory studied law. He volunteered in the Florida militia during the Second Seminole War and became the inspector of customs at Key West. In 1830, he met Angela Moreno of Pensacola, who became his wife. And he served his country as a United States Senator and Secretary of the Confederate Navy, which he was most notably in history for. After the Civil War, he became one of Pensacola's most premier attorneys, and he passed away, and this is where he was buried. So his major claim to fame was not only as a senator or not only as a soldier during the Second Seminole War, but also as the Secretary of Navy for the Confederate States Army during the American Civil War. And Mallory's grave is right here in front of us, which is so cool. And as you can see, as we walk through here, there are just graves after graves and tombs after tombs. And this one is unmarked. And then a lot of these other graves and tombs are unmarked. But you have some of these that are marked, 1833. See, this grave is from 1833. 1810 was the birth date. So as we browse through the cemetery, I will show you things that are notable to history as we come across them, or things that look kind of cool. But this just gives you an idea of how old this city is. I mean, a second Spanish period. Pensacola was originally a Spanish settlement, and it was discovered by Don Tristan de Luna, who had a fleet of around 13 ships which sank in Pensacola Bay. And this gives you an idea of some of the history in the Pensacola as we look here. It's one of the oldest existent cemeteries in the state and in America, which is pretty cool. So this placard is showing a history of Pensacola. Pensacola was in the mid 18th century a small frontier outpost established by the Spanish in the 1750s as Presidio San Miguel de Pensacola. I'm probably not saying that right. and it was quickly enlarged in the city streetscape defined by the British in 1763 to 81. When the Spanish regained control of Pensacola in 1781, they utilized infrastructure that was already in place here. And one area of that was designated for use as the general site of the community burial ground was right here. And this shows some really cool maps. This is a bird eye view of 1885 showing the area where we are now in St. Michael's Cemetery. And just all kinds, here's 1816 showing the site, 1827. Wow, this is really cool. And then all kinds of points of interest here of people that have lived here, their homes. And this is pretty neat. Grave materials. Bricks were commonly used in St. Michael's because there was no local stone source. But here in Pensacola, bricks was a big industrial shipment that came in and out of this place. Bricks were made in kilns here and shipped to other places. So bricks were plentiful here. And clay deposits in the area provided that material for those bricks. And brick companies began to spring up here in Pensacola, and the brick companies took stock in the floors and walls of their tombs and enclosures with these bricks. So, pretty cool. And as we check out the cemetery, you will notice that a lot of these tombs and walls and enclosures are made of those bricks. So those are bricks that actually have a lot of history tied to Pensacola as well, because those bricks were made here locally by the people who lived and worked here in Pensacola and actually owned those businesses. So a lot of those business owners that own these brick companies, their graves were decorated with their bricks and enclosed with their bricks from their company, which is pretty cool. Wow, check this one out. 1826, died 1860, just before the Civil War. If you gotta go, at least you miss that devastation of 1861 and 65. See, this grave is very cool. Check out how they did the floor. All concrete. The whole entire thing. I've never really seen that before. That is really neat. And you can always, I love the texture of old concrete, because you can see all the pebbles and rocks that go into making this thing up, as you can see here. And it's just been weathered so much over time, and those have been brought back to the surface. And this grave over here is a prime example of what I was just talking about, the bricks. This is actually a man who owned a brick company here, Henry Ahearns, and these bricks were taken from his company and made to put around his grave. He was a native of Germany. He was born March the 24th, 1784. He died May the 23rd, 1870. He was 86 years old and 2 months, and he resided in Pensacola for 50-something years, and this is where a lot of his bricks came from. Pretty cool. So as we continue our stroll through St. Michael's Cemetery, this is a walking, living, talking, breathing history book right here into Pensacola's history. You've seen some pretty historic graves and some pretty cool things already. And with me, well, right behind me right here is another cool grave that I hope you can see with the sun glaring like it is. But this grave actually goes down into a crypt. That's the way a lot of these graves here in St. Michael's Cemetery are. And it's actually really neat to look at and see how graves are designed. You know, us being live here on Earth, well, we don't want to wind up in one of these before we have to. But I just stumbled upon another famous grave here locally that I want to let you in on. Okay, so here's another local famous grave of Ebenezer Dorr. And she was a native of Maine and spent 14 months as a prisoner of war in England during the War of 1812. He was a captain of his own ship for many years, and he traded ports around the world. But in 1827, he moved his family to Escambia County, Florida, where in 1841, he was appointed U.S. Marshal of the Western District of the Territory of Florida. With Florida statehood elected in 1845, he was elected as the first sheriff of Pensacola in Escambia County, Florida. So pretty cool. He was the first sheriff here, and he was also a steamboat captain. So pretty neat. Now, there is not a log that I have found yet of graves that's in this cemetery that we can actually look up and see who's here. But there are markers on some of the graves here, such as probably one of the most prominent people buried in St. Michael Cemetery here in Pensacola, Florida, and that is Don Manuel Gonzalez. He was a native of Spain, and he joined the army at Madrid and was sent to New Orleans. After his discharge, he was granted passage through the Choctaw and Creek Nations to Pensacola, which is where I live on the Creek Indian Reservation. At Pensacola, he was successful as a cattle rancher, and he opened a market on Plaza Ferdinand, which is the town plaza in downtown Pensacola, even still today. And he founded that in 1816, and it was a trade, kind of a trade center, a trade central. With the transfer of Florida to the United States, he was appointed Justice of the Peace and Quartermaster General for the Florida Militia. So this is a very prominent member here in Pensacola, and he has several things here named after him. And look at this. Look at this cross. Our dear. And his wife is buried here as well, along with their daughter. So, pretty cool. Okay, so we are leaving the Don Manuel gravesite, and we're going to take a little quick gander before we get out of here, because it is around 100 degrees today. It's very hot, and we have a lot more to see here in Pensacola. So this will not be the only episode you guys see from Pensacola. We actually will be filming here again in just a few days, and you do not want to miss that series as well from the Naval Aviation Museum here in Pensacola, Florida. And also we have some videos coming up with my friend JD from the History Underground. If you guys have not checked out the History Underground here on YouTube, please go do that. Give him a like, a share, a subscribe, the whole 9 yards. JD is doing some awesome things within the history field and showing you all kinds of historic locations, and he is great at teaching the history and talking to a lot of people. And check out his Gettysburg series that he just wrapped up with. So pretty cool story about JD's channel and how it came about. And you know, I've got all the respect in the world for him. So he's very good at what he does, and it's 10 times better than I could ever be at taking you to historic sites and locations. So make sure you check him out at The History Underground here on YouTube. And for History Saver 1941, let's continue to the next location. So keep preserving history. Stay safe. Can you see me? The sun's bright. It's 100 degrees. I'm melting. Is it on? I don't know. Well, guys, if this thing is on, well, I'm making my way back to the car, and I am literally burning up. Oh, it's a live oak tree. My saving grace. Guys, if you're ever here in the South and you want to get cooled off really quick, even though it could be 150 degrees outside, a live oak is your saving grace. Wow. I hope this graveyard's not haunted. Probably is. Okay, so we're leaving the cemetery, but for you guys wondering what this big building in the background is, well, that's actually where I play hockey at. So for those of you who've always wondered where History Saver plays hockey at, well, that's it. And I'm in the graveyard right beside it. So pretty cool. The ghost of this graveyard can hear the fans cheering my name. Not really, but yeah, anyway.